The last topic that we will be discussing this semester is the Balanced Scorecard, an exceptionally powerful tool that not only assesses the extent to which we have met our profit goals, but also helps managers to know what they need to do to achieve those goals. The Balanced Scorecard assesses the extent to which the firm has met its stakeholders' goals through a set of performance measures that are divided into 4 specific areas: financial, customer service, internal business processes, and learning and growth. But you should probably think about these goals from the bottom up. The learning and growth perspective has to do with things that we can do internally in order to help our employees to have better skills and skills in a wider range of areas. If our workers have more skills, then it's likely that our firm will run better. The internal business processes perspective assesses how our firm operates. If our firm operates better, then it is likely that our customers will be more satisfied with the goods or services that we provide. And if we are better able to do our jobs and our firm runs better and our customers are more satisfied, then it is likely that our financial performance will also improve. The key to this is focusing on the drivers of our firm's success. In other words, the things that will make the difference in how successful we are. Within each perspective, we need to do a couple of things. Number 1, we need to identify measurable goals based on our competitive environment, based on the things that would help us to improve. And these goals can differ from period to period depending on what we consider to be the most significant problems. Once we've identified our goals, we need to develop ways to measure the extent to which our firm is making progress at meeting those goals. Then we need to set a target for the period. What level of progress do we expect a manager or a department or a division to make? And then finally, we need to set plans. What is that person, that division, that department going to do to achieve that goal in the coming period? This is what a balanced scorecard looks like, and you can see the 4 perspectives. For each perspective, we're going to set several goals for the period. Notice there aren't too many lines for each perspective. That's because people cannot focus on too many goals at one time. So most firms set between 1 and 3 goals for each of the perspectives for the coming period. When those goals are met, then the firm can shift to other goals for that perspective. For each goal, we need specific measures. How are we going to know when those goals are achieved? And finally, we need targets. How much improvement do we expect to see in the coming period? Let's take a look at the relationships among these perspectives. The customer perspective obviously has a direct effect on the firm's ability to be profitable. Therefore, the firm needs to consider what issues are hampering customer satisfaction. If those issues are resolved, then profitability should go up. For example, the firm may be concerned about problems with quality control. So what might be bothering the firm? We have to look at what's bothering the customers. We may find the customers are not satisfied with our products. In that case, our goal might be to increase customer satisfaction. Alternatively, we may find that we are being hampered by high costs of dealing with customer complaints, or we might want to reduce the warranty costs for repairing defective products. Depending on the goals that we choose, that will affect the measures that we choose. So we might use the measure of how many customer complaints we have in the period, or we might choose the number of service calls, or we might choose the number of products that are returned. What if our customer issue is problems with deliveries? We might set a goal to deliver our products or services on time. In that case, our measure might be the percentage of on-time deliveries, or it might be the percentage of deliveries that arrive damaged. Whatever it is that is bothering our firm and limiting our ability to be profitable. Our customer perspective might include issues that relate to bookings and purchase orders. We might want to think about this because the number of bookings and the number of purchase orders is an indicator of future revenue streams. In that case, we need to find a way to track our future bookings and purchase orders because these are not measured in traditional financial information systems. Alternatively, we might be concerned about our market share. We might want to consider total market share or total growth in the market, in which case we'd have to consider relative market share. Our share of the market will decrease if the market is growing faster than our firm's sales are growing. Now let's think about the internal business perspective. This relates to how our firm operates. In other words, the efficiency and effectiveness of performing our tasks. One way to capture this is to use manufacturing cycle time, which is the total amount of time that our firm takes to produce goods or services. Cycle time also relates to the product's quality and its costs. So cycle time is going to include how much time we spent processing our goods, how much time we spent moving things around the factory, how much time we spent storing things while we waited for something else to happen, and how much time we spent inspecting our materials, our work in process, or our finished goods. These costs are not all the same. Processing our goods is a value-added cost. In other words, customers care about the processing of the products. However, moving and storage and inspections are non-value-added costs, not because we don't have to do them, but because customers don't buy our product because we spent more moving things around or storing things or inspecting things. All customers care about is that the product performs the way that they expect it to. Another issue is manufacturing cycle efficiency. That is, how much time do we actually spend on value-added costs out of all costs? Or how much time do we spend processing our products out of the total cycle time? The formula for cycle efficiency is value-added time over the combination of value-added time and non-value-added time. So that would tell us how much time did we spend processing our products out of all the time from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. Let's look at an example. We have a company, and the company has kept track of the average amount of time that it spent processing its goods, inspecting its goods, waiting for things to happen, and moving things around. Altogether, the manufacturing cycle time is going to be the total of all of these times. In this case, 14 hours. What about manufacturing cycle efficiency? Manufacturing cycle efficiency will be the proportion of manufacturing time out of all of the time that we spent from the beginning to the end. In this case, our efficiency is only 25% because we only spent 3.5 hours out of a total of 14 hours processing our product. We might want to consider how we could improve our cycle efficiency by decreasing some of these non-value-added costs. We might want to consider how we could improve our manufacturing cycle efficiency by decreasing some of the time that we spend on non-value-added activities. Another issue in internal business processes is productivity, which means the ratio of what we got out to what we put in. Total productivity has to be measured in dollars. Dollars for material, dollars for labor, dollars for overhead that we put in compared to the dollar value of what we got out. And what it's telling us is how efficient we are at converting our manufacturing inputs into our manufacturing output. Total productivity is used when we are considering different kinds of inputs. For example, if we have material inputs and labor inputs and overhead inputs, we convert them all to dollars to make our comparison. The formula for productivity is the dollar value of the outputs divided by the dollar value of the inputs. Partial productivity focuses on a single input, like materials or labor. In this case, we can measure the ratio of what we got out compared to what we put in, either in dollars or in units of that input. So the formula is how much we got out, either as a quantity measure or as a dollar measure, divided by how much we put in of that particular item. Again, either in quantity or in dollar value. Let's look at an example. Chemical company has two plants, the East plant and the West plant. Both of these plants do the same thing. They turn material X into product Y. And we've gathered a significant amount of data for last year and this year on each plant's productivity. And we're trying to decide whether there are any areas where improvements could be made. Here's the data for the East plant last year and this year. Here's the data for the West plant. And we're trying to decide on each plant's productivity in terms of transforming input X into output Y. So let's look at the East plant. If we want to look specifically at materials partial productivity, we would find the total number of pounds of the product Y divided by the total number of pounds of the input X. In this case, our partial productivity for material is 0.85. In other words, we got 0.85 pounds of product per pound of direct materials. This year, we can do the same thing. Divide the total number of pounds of the output by the total number of pounds of the input, and we get a number, 0.88 pounds of product per pound of materials. What this tells us is that our materials partial productivity increased between last year and this year. In other words, we were more efficient at getting output from our materials input. We could do the same thing for labor partial productivity by taking the number of pounds of output last year and dividing by the number of labor hours that it took to get that output. And we would find that we generated 6.59 pounds of product Y per labor hour. This year, if we did the same calculation, we would find that we get 6.625 pounds of our product per labor hour. What that shows us is that our labor partial productivity also increased between last year and this year. We were more efficient at generating output per hour of labor. Let's look at the East plant's total factor productivity. Here we have to make sure to consider everything in terms of dollars because we have two different inputs, materials and labor. To do this, we're going to take the sales value of our output, that is, the number of pounds times the selling price per pound, and we're going to divide it by the total of our cost of materials and the cost of labor and the cost of overhead. When we do that, we find that we got $1.34 of our final product per dollar of total inputs. Is this good news or bad news? The answer is it depends. We need to compare this to something in order to decide whether it's acceptable. We're going to compare it to this year's total factor productivity. So we take the total sales value for our product this year and divide it by the cost of our materials this year, plus the cost of our labor this year, plus the cost of our overhead this year. When we divide this out, we find that this year our total factor productivity has increased. This year we got $1.35 of output per dollar of inputs. That's good news. We could do the same thing for the West plant, and I did in this chart. What we see is that the East plant improved in all three productivity measures as we just calculated. What about the West plant? We see that the West plant is actually bigger than the East plant, and it also has lower costs for both materials and labor, and you can see this for yourself if you look back at the underlying data for this example. But how did the West plant do in terms of productivity? Well, they had slightly higher materials partial productivity, but they had lower labor partial productivity. And in fact, their total factor productivity stayed the same during the period. Therefore, management might want to suggest investigating the labor practices at the West plant to find out why labor partial productivity decreased. We might want to think about how we recruit employees, how we train them, whether we are retaining qualified employees. And these issues would relate to the learning and growth perspective on the balanced scorecard. In addition, we would want to encourage the East plant to continue its good work and its plans for continuing improvement. Continuous improvement is very important for firms in a competitive environment, and it includes all of the activities that the firm or the division or the department engages in to improve its efficiency. Each department needs to document all of the activities that it engages in and to work on plans to eliminate or reduce non-value-added activities and to improve the efficiency of its value-added activities. Another issue is benchmarking. We need to be able to compare our performance to best practices. We can compare to other firms, and if they'll tell us what they're doing, we can adopt those best practices. One of the keys to the balanced scorecard is its focus on non-financial measures. There aren't that many people within an organization who have a direct effect on the firm's financial performance. So it's extremely helpful to use activity data as part of our measures of whether our managers are performing up to expectations. Using activity data helps us to identify any problems that exist in a division or a department, and it also suggests ways that we can fix the problem and helps us to identify the worst problems so that we can prioritize our strategy for improvement. However, when a firm uses non-financial performance measures, it needs to make sure that it links those measures to its overall strategy. There is no point in measuring something if it's not related to where the firm is trying to go. In addition, it's important to make sure that those links between performance and strategy are valid. That is, what we're measuring is actually related to what we are trying to achieve. Furthermore, we need to think carefully about our performance targets. If we choose the wrong performance targets, or if we choose targets that are unachievable, they are not going to help us to reach our goals. Finally, if we measure performance incorrectly, managers are just going to think that we are unfair and unreasonable. In order to use non-financial performance measures effectively, these measures should be objective. How do we know if a measure is objective? It means that managers should all be able to agree that the performance measure is correctly calculated. And that should be true even if they disagree on whether it's the appropriate measure. If a firm chooses subjective measures, that means that managers can look at the exact same set of facts, yet come to different conclusions. This is not helpful for evaluating performance. If managers can disagree about the conclusion, then it distorts the objective nature of the performance measure. All things considered, remember this: we are what we are rewarded to be. Therefore, it's important for you to make sure that the performance measures you choose will lead to the performances you actually want.